I am Dr. Shravani Chakravarti, teaching English in the Department of English, Government Bilasa, Girls PG College, Bilaspur. Today I am going to teach you a unit from your fourth paper of the fourth semester, American Literature. The text for your non-detailed study, Unit 6, Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Fall of the House of Usher. Edgar Allan Poe was an American writer, poet, editor, and literary critic. I am giving you first the introduction of the poet and the writer. Poe is best known for his poetry and short stories, particularly his tales of mystery and the macabre. Macabre here means which is gruesome or which causes fear of death. Edgar Allan Poe was born on 19th of January 1809 in Boston, Massachusetts, US, and he died on 7th of October 1849 at Baltimore, Maryland. Now about his works. His well-known poems are The Raven, Annabel Lee, Alone, A Dream Within a Dream, The Bells, El Dorado, and Lenore. His popular short stories are The Black Cat, The Tell-Tale Heart, The Mask of the Red Death, The Fall of the House of Usher, The Gold Bug, Ligeia, and The Cask of Amontillado. His alma mater is University of Virginia, U.S. Military Academy, where he received his education. Poe was not only a superlative author of poetry and fiction, but also a literary critic whose level of imagination and insight previously has been unapproached in American literature. Poe's most conspicuous contribution to the world literature derives from the analytical method he practiced both as a creative author and also as a critic of the works of his contemporaries. Apart from the theoretical basis, there is a psychological intensity that is characteristic of Poe's writings, especially his best-known works. These stories, like The Black Cat, The Cask of the Amontillado, The Tell-Tale Heart, they are often told by a first-person narrator. And through this voice, he examines the working of the character's psyche. This technique foreshadows the psychoanalysis explorations of Fyodor Dostoevsky, who was a very popular Russian novelist, and the school of psychological realism. In his Gothic tales, now this term Gothic means which is an extinct East Germanic language. It is a branch of the Germanic language which has become extinct now, and also it means that the style of architecture in the Gothic era was typically different. It had arches and the rib walls. So the Gothic architecture is very famous, and it relates to something which is a little fearful. It was quite fearful. So, in his Gothic tales, Poe employed symbolic, almost allegorical method, which gives such works as The Fall of the House of Usher, The Mask of the Red Death, and Ligeia. And we can see an enigmatic quality that accounts for their enduring interest and links them with the symbolical works of Nathaniel Hawthorne and Herman Melville. Poe has also been credited with parenting to two other popular genres. One is the science fiction and the other is the detective story. Now, coming to the short story, The Fall of the House of Usher. I am going to narrate you the gist or the summary of the story. The story has been narrated in first person by the narrator. The fall of the House of Usher begins with the unidentified male narrator riding to the house of Roderick Usher, a childhood friend whom the narrator has not seen for many years. The narrator tells that he has recently received a letter from Roderick, that is the protagonist of this novel, a short story, detailing his worsening mental illness and requesting him for his company. Out of sympathy for his old friend, the narrator agreed to come. Apart from the knowledge of Roderick's ancient and distinguished family, the narrator knows very little about his friend. Upon arriving, the narrator describes the great mansion, that is, the house of the Ushers, which is a large, impressive house of the Usher family in minute detail, focusing on its most fantastic features and its unearthly atmosphere. Soon after entering, the narrator is greeted by Roderick, who displays a number of strange symptoms. He claims that his senses are specially acute so that he cannot wear clothes of certain textures or eat particularly flavored food, and his eyes are bothered by even the faintest lights. That means he is a sort of a hypochondriac. That means a person who is abnormally anxious about his health. Within a few hours of the narrator's arrival, Roderick begins to share some of his theories about his family. Much to the narrator's surprise, Roderick claims that the Usher mansion is sentient. This is again a new word which means that which is living or able to perceive or feel things. It can sense, it can communicate, we can touch it. So that is the meaning of sentient, and Roderick says that his mansion is sentient and that it exercises some degree of control over its inhabitants. He declares that his illness is the product of a constitutional and family evil. The narrator later dismisses this as a cognitive symptom of Roderick's nervous affection. Roderick reveals that Madeline, his twin sister and sole companion in the house, is gravely ill. So now we see the next character, that is the sister of Roderick, whose name is Madeline and who also lives in this Usher house. According to Roderick, Madeline suffers from a cataleptic disease. Cataleptic disease means a trance-like state, means there is a stillness of the limbs. She suffers from the cataleptic disease that has gradually limited her mobility. She is not able to move as a normal human being. As Roderick talks about his sister's illness, the narrator sees her pass through a distant part of the house. The narrator spends the next few days painting, reading, and listening to Roderick's play music. He recalls the eerie lyrics. Eerie means strange and frightening. From one of Roderick's songs, endearingly titled The Haunted Palace, which has been given in the short story only, and I will read out the penultimate, that is the second last stanza or the fifth stanza of that poem, which has been written by Poe inside this story. So I quote, "But evil things in robes of sorrow assail the monarch's high estate. Ah, let us mourn, for never morrow shall dawn upon him desolate. And round about his home the glory that blushed and bloomed is but a dim, remembered story of the old time entombed." Unquote. So, these lines are from the short story The Fall of the House of Usher. Now, several days after the narrator's arrival, Roderick announces the death of his sister. He asks the narrator to help him to bury her. As they lay her in a tomb beneath the house, the narrator notes that she is smiling and her cheeks are rosy. Over the next few days, the narrator observes a change in his friend's behavior. Roderick has begun to display symptoms of madness and hysteria. That means he shows a state of panic or an uncontrolled excitement. This is something very unusual for a normal person, which the narrator observes. Roderick neglects his work, wandering aimlessly around the house and staring off into the distance. Increasingly frightened by his friend and his environment, the narrator begins to suffer from insomnia. See, the effect of the House of Usher and the two inhabitants who lived in that house, that is Roderick and Madeline, his sister, had its effect even on the narrator, who is staying there and observing each and everything in minute detail. So he also suffers from a disease known as insomnia, which means sleeplessness. Late one night, Roderick visits the narrator in his bedchamber. After a few moments of silence, he abruptly asks, I quote, "And you have not seen it?" Unquote. He then throws open the window to reveal that the house, and indeed everything outside, is enveloped in a glowing gas. The baffled, that means the perplexed or the puzzled narrator, the baffle or it on electrical phenomena resulting from an ongoing storm. He attempts to soothe Roderick by reading aloud to him from Mad Trist, a medieval romance by Sir Lancelot Canning. This is a romance, and Canning are Poe's inventions. Now, as the narrator reads, sounds from the book seemingly begin to manifest in the house. See how the mystery develops right from the beginning of the story when the narrator comes and enters the house of the ushers. And it continues throughout the story, deepening on each and every step as the story goes further. After a while, the narrator stops reading and approaches Roderick, who is slumped over in a chair, rocking and muttering to himself. We see his hysteria, or we can say the madness in the character of Roderick. For the first time, the narrator listens to what Roderick is saying. He learns that Roderick has been hearing sounds for days. He believes they are coming from Madeline, whom he thinks they have buried alive. As the horror of his words dawns on the narrator, Roderick suddenly springs to his feet, yelling, in quote, "Madman, I tell you that she now stands the door," unquote. At Roderick's words, the door bursts open, revealing Madeline in white with blood on her robes. With a moan, she falls on her brother, and by the time they hit the floor, both Madeline and Roderick are dead. The narrator thereupon runs away in terror. Outside, he looks back just in time to see the house split into two parts and collapse. So we see that it is an allegorical presentation by the author Poe that the fall of the House of Usher, it is not only the house which falls, but it is also the inhabitants or the characters or the state of mind which has been presented by the character Roderick Usher. It also collapses at the end of the story. So this is the gist or the summary of the story. Today I am going to tell you about the critical analysis of the story by Edgar Allan Poe, The Fall of the House of Usher. The Fall of the House of Usher possesses the quintessential, that means it is a representative of the most perfect or typical example of a quality or a class of those times, and which features the Gothic, that is, as I explained to you earlier, that is an extinct European language and architecture. So the Fall of the House of Usher possesses the quintessential features or the characteristic of the Gothic tale: a haunted house, dreary landscape, mysterious sickness, and doubled personality. For all its easily identifiable Gothic elements, however, part of the terror of this story is its vagueness. We are not sure as to when the story takes place instead of standard narrative markers of place and time. Like earlier, you must have read about other short stories like Catherine Mansfield, A Cup of Tea, or a beautiful story like The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde. But this short story by Edgar Allan Poe, The Fall of the House of Usher, is completely different from the genre of stories which I have mentioned to you just now. It is entirely different. Poe uses the traditional Gothic elements such as inclement. Inclement means a bleak, chilly, cold, bitter weather, and a barren landscape. Barren is where nothing grows. It is the opposite of fertile. So we are alone with the narrator in this haunted space, and neither we nor the narrator know why it is so. It is vague. Although he is Roderick's most intimate childhood friend, the narrator apparently does not know much about him, like the fact that Roderick has a twin sister. The author asks us to question the reasons both for Roderick's decision to contact the narrator in this time of need and bizarre tenacity of narrator's response. While Poe provides the recognizable building blocks of the Gothic tale, he contrasts this standard form with a plot that is inexplicable, sudden, and full of unexpected disruptions. So you can see that these are the elements of the Gothic tale which is different from the normal short stories or pleasant short stories. The story begins without complete explanation of the narrator's motives for arriving at the house of the Ushers, and this ambiguity sets the tone for a plot that continually blurs the real and the phantasmagoric. Ambiguity means there is a double meaning. or double standard. We are not able to understand which is the correct and which is the wrong. And here the word phantasmagoric means a sequence of real or imaginary images like that we see in a dream. So that type of plot has been constructed or structured by Poe in this short story, which blurs the real. The real is not visible, but we can only see the imaginary images as we see in a dream. He constructs. So that is his technique and his style, which makes the story very interesting in spite of the fact that it is a horror story and it takes place in a haunted space. The narrator is mysteriously trapped by the lure of Roderick's attraction, and he cannot escape until the House of Usher collapses completely. Characters cannot move and act freely in the house because of its structure, that is the Gothic structure. So it assumes a monstrous character of its own, the Gothic mastermind that controls its inhabitants. Poe creates confusion between the living things and inanimate objects by doubling the physical house of Usher with the genetic line of the Usher family, which he refers to as the House of Usher. Poe employs the word house in inverted commas metaphorically, that is symbolically, or we can also say allegorically, but he also describes a real house, that is the mansion. Not only does the narrator get trapped inside the mansion, but we learn that his confinement describes the biological fate of the Usher family. The family has no enduring branches, so all genetic transmission has occurred incestuously within the domain of the house. The presentry confuses the mansion with family because of the physical structure has effectively dictated the genetic patterns in the family. Thank you.